When I started preaching, it was verse by verse through books of the Bible with the New American Standard Bible. That's how I did it, and I loved it. But I've changed how I've preached. Why? We'll talk about it on this episode. Dad, how did you preach when you were preaching regularly? Was it verse by verse, through books of the Bible, topical?
Well,
What did you do?
well, the direct answer before you elongated your question was how did I preach? Poorly. And then the other part was from the back of an envelope. So those are the first two answers to the question. I shouldn't say I never had manuscripts. My first 7 sermons were manuscripts. And I said, heck with that, and started preaching from the back of an envelope. So I preach books of the Bible. Typically, I would start off in Philippians, and if I was new in a church, and I'd introduce the theme of joy, which is manifest throughout that book. And then after that, I started alternating Old Testament and New Testament books. And I did not use NASB. I did not use the New American Standard Bible because it was too wooden for me for the pulpit. I understand its accuracy, but it was too wooden for me. And back then, I used the NIV. Today, anytime I'm speaking, preaching, where the Bible is the central part of it, I use the New Living Translation. I love it. So that's what that answers. So that's a long answer to a question that you only wanted me to say one thing about, but that's it.
You know, I started preaching through books of the Bible, thinking that was the only way to preach, and it's a good way to preach. But I grew a little bit as a preacher, and expanded the approach that I take, and I'm glad I did. My bread and butter is still verse by verse through books of the Bible, and I think that everyone should preach that way. Some sermons a year. I can't go so far as to say that it needs to be every sermon or all sermons.
I have not found any of the advocates who say that do that. In fact, I'm thinking of one advocate in particular that says always verse by verse, book by book. And then I discovered he had a wealth of sermons online that some were topical, some were doctrinal, and some were seasonal. So wait a minute. Yeah, not going to mention the person.
Well, let's talk about this because I know that people have strong opinions about the right approach to preaching. And I know that there's a camp that would be very strong in the verse by verse, straight through books of the Bible. And generally, I would agree with them. I think that that's a great approach. I couldn't go so far as to say it's the only approach. So let's talk about what's best. Topical preaching will inevitably miss certain sections of Scripture. So if you're only topical, by design, it's unlikely you're landing in sections of 1 Corinthians, Ezekiel, Leviticus.
Certainly, you're not landing in the totality of it where you can understand, where the listener can understand the book in its biblical context at the time, because the purpose of the sermon is to support the topic instead of defining what the sermon is. And that's why I'm in total agreement with you, though you and I don't plan these ahead of time. We don't plan many things ahead
No,
of
we
time.
don't.
But I am with you that verse by verse through the Bible is the best way. But if it becomes the only way, I think you're going to miss a lot.
Yeah. Now let's talk about what you miss with verse by verse preaching. You will miss the overarching storyline of the Bible. People will not quite understand how certain sections of Scripture connect with each other, and they won't get the whole theme of the Bible if all that you're doing is we're going to look at these 3 verses today, and then the next week we're going to look at these next 3 verses.
Blue light special, blue light special, blue light special. You don't know what that means.
I don't know the reference.
Amy knows. It's the old Kmart thing where they would have sales and there'd be a blue light going through
I know
the store.
that. I thought it was a movie reference. I don't know what the old Kmart blue light special is.
That's where it started. Blue light. When the blue light goes on, you'd see people start running toward the
Oh,
blue
that,
light because they knew it was going to be a
yes.
special. They had FOMO, fear of missing out, and the blue light special would last 10 minutes, and people would be grabbing and punching each other. That's maybe exaggeration, but that's the blue light.
FOMO,
Okay,
FOMO before
I got
FOMO missed out. But FOMO before FOMO
yes.
existed. You know, you
Kmart had some good approaches. They just didn't succeed at them. So I got to talk about this for just a
go
second.
ahead.
Your book on the whole Bible,
Yeah.
it is a classic. Understanding the Bible as a whole. We are going through that in my community group, and lights are going on. Comments, even as they are reading it, are being made. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. And what I learned about the people in my community group is they have never had a grand view of the scripture, meta view of the scripture. And so we're taking your book and we're going through the whole Bible in however many chapters you have, I can't remember. But that is a classic book. Congratulations.
Well, we'll put a link in the show notes for people
Oh, will we?
to, well, why not? If we're going to talk about it, I might as well let
There
people
you
go
go.
buy it. Yeah, Understanding the Bible as a Whole. My latest book is out and would be excited for you to get a copy. Okay, so topical preaching will inevitably miss certain sections of Scripture. Verse by verse preaching will miss the overarching narrative, the storyline of the Bible. And there are other ways of preaching, other valid ways of preaching, really other than topical and verse by verse. You've got character studies. We're going to study David for 10 weeks, you know, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, because he appears in both. So you've got character studies. You've got thematic types of sermons. We're going to look at the theology of hope in the New Testament. You're not going to get that either with topical or verse by verse preaching, or just straight up narrative preaching. Like, hey, let's talk about the story of Jonah. Jonah's a great, I mean, you could preach Jonah verse by verse, of course, but I think the best approach to preaching Jonah is with a narrative, as is the case with a lot of Old Testament scripture.
Several years ago, I mean, all the way back to, I think, 1996, I wrote a book called Effective Evangelistic Churches. One of the questions we asked was, what is your preferred style of preaching? I don't have the book in front of me, so I cannot get the percentages, but around 1 out of 20, around 5%, if I recall, said that they do narrative preaching 100% of the time. I don't know how you do that. Some things lend themselves to a story. I'm trying to think, how do you tell us?
When you get to Romans, how do you do that?
Yes. So that felt like it was a bit of pick and choose, but then I never talked to those pastor preachers who responded to that. So I'm not sure what they were saying when they said they do narrative 100% of the time.
Well, here's the thing. There's different genres of scripture, so you have to approach genres differently. And
there's nothing like a genre to make your day. I mean, I had espresso and genre for breakfast. It's really good.
Good for you. So before you get me off topic again, back to this idea of, hey, you know, a guy that really hits verse by verse hard, says this is the only way to preach, and then doesn't do it. I've got a little jab, if you will, and I mean this in jest. I mean, it's a good natured jab. Let me just say that. When you drill so far down into verse by verse, you become topical, because I know people that will say, we're going to study this one verse or this one phrase of this one verse, and like, and
they start bringing
we're so verse by verse that we're looking at one word at a time, and it's like, you topical, you not verse by verse. You drill so far down into the verse by verse category and that method of preaching, and it becomes topical.
All kind of scriptural references all over the place, Old Testament and New Testament.
We're going to study this word hope today. It's just one word in this verse, and then it becomes a topical sermon on hope, or at least a thematic sermon, if not a topical sermon. So, okay, here's the key. Obviously, you guys have figured out, if you're listening to this at this point in this YouTube video, you've figured out where we stand. We are comfortable with a variety of approaches, variety of methods to preaching. The key is you have to be exegetical. Pull from the text. Let the text determine your message, not the other way around. So no matter what approach you're using, always make sure that you're deriving meaning from the text and not reading your preferences or your opinions into the text. That is the key. It's an exegetical
Sam,
approach.
exegetical has its root to pull out of. So you're pulling out of the text. The opposite of this is called eisegetical, and that is to put into the text what you want it to be. Exegetical is you're letting the text speak to you. You're pulling out of it. I had to give a little bit of grammarian lesson there.
Exegesis, not eisegesis. And you say eisegesis, but I say eisegesis. So tomato. But I would also say be expository. Preach expository sermons. Explain the text. Form your explanations based upon your exegesis. So what's the key? Exegetical sermons, expository sermons. And then please apply the text to where your people are today. I believe that's having a proper hermeneutic, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't had many preaching classes, even though I've preached many sermons. Apply the text to where your people are today. Please don't apply the text to where the people were in the 1950s. We live in a certain world today, and the people today need to hear sermons.
Back to the old days, 1996, when I published Effective Evangelistic Churches, I left blanks for them to be able to fill in any type of sermon, gave them choices. I'm sure it was in jest, but 3 respondents of the 576 put suppository. They did. It must have been on end times. I don't know.
That's a completely different approach to preparing a sermon, and we'll just have to leave it at that. I like what you've done. Absolutely. It's what I do. I switch between Old Testament and New Testament every year. I go through books of the Bible and I preach topically. So when I write my outlines, or at least the ideas of what I'm going to preach on certain days, roughly about 18 months in advance. And as I'm looking at that 18 months, am I preaching a New Testament book? Am I preaching an Old Testament book? Have I got a good mix of methods when it comes to thematic, narrative, character studies, topical, verse by verse? I try to hit all of those categories in an 18-month time frame. I think it's good for my soul, and I think it's good for the edification of my church because they are hearing things in a little different way. So it depends. Verse by verse, the books of the Bible are topical. It depends. Well, we certainly thank you for listening today, and we want to give you a free 30-day trial of our silver membership. So go to churchanswers.com/free, link below, and give it a whirl. Try it out.
So silver membership puts you in a community where you can ask anything at any time and get a safe question and safe answer. Experts will answer it, or your community will answer it. It's an incredible place to be. Almost every 5 minutes or so during the day, we're seeing a new question come in. It's incredible. We have added to silver, know your budget. And so you can compare your budget to others. So that's a huge addition. And that's $9.97 a month, usually $100 a year, but free for those who want to give it a try.
Well, at the time of this recording, I don't often post in there. I'm usually responding as an expert. But I posted recently about the time when the SWAT team showed up at my church. But I'm not going to tell you any more than that. You're going to have to go find it.
You're going to have to go get a free subscription and look and see what Sam said.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a hint. The pastor was not the target of the SWAT team.
No, I was not, thankfully. But I'm just going to leave it there. And that is also just an example of you can find all sorts of fun stuff at Church Answers Central, which is included in the silver membership. So get a free membership. Go check it out. Like this video, hit subscribe. Visit us at churchanswers.com, where we are growing healthy churches together.